All right, Shalom. I want to start out by giving all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today, I'm just going to be doing a quick lesson on, a video or a clip that, a brother has shared, where you pretty much have, a black woman, questioning other black women on why they hate their hair, on why they wear, these weaves, these wigs or so-called protective styles, right? But yet, black men can grow their hair, with no problem, right? So I'm just going to play this clip and bring out a couple of scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying, straight to the point. And, this video is being used for educational purposes only. I'm not making any money off of, this woman's content, strictly being used, again, for educational purposes. So fair use, fair use, fair use. And let's see what she has to say.
Black woman, answer me this. We have males that have the same hair texture as us. Why aren't they wearing wigs and weave to protect their hair? Explain to me this. And why a lot of black men, dreads be longer than us? Hair be longer than us. But then we're sitting here saying we need to protect our hair. Why don't they need to protect their hair? And they got the same hair texture as us. It's only women that are not noticing that they are brainwashed to think that their hair is unprofessional, to think that their hair is hard to maintain, but never try to maintain it. Again, we have another sex with the same hair texture as us, and they don't wear wigs and weave. They embrace their natural hair. They wear their natural hair. And y'all sitting here saying it's hard to maintain, but you just don't want to admit that you hate your hair. And that's why you wear other textures that's not yours. Y'all hate your hair. We have another sex that have the same hair texture that don't need to protect it. Black.
And she's questioning, right? But how is it that, black women have a hard time growing their hair? It's because the Lord cursed them, and that was a curse because the glory of the woman is her hair, That's why, I'll say most black women, they have a hard time either growing their hair or if not growing it, they don't have a whole lot. Why? Because again, the Lord cursed them for, their pride, So let's get there real quick. This one ain't gonna be too long, but this is why, our women, when I say our women in particular, so-called black women, have a hard time growing their hair. So this is the book of Isaiah, chapter 3 and verse 16. And as you can see, the subtitle reads, Judah's women denounce. So the Judite woman, this applies to you primarily. It says, moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with stretched forth neck. Slakia. Let's start that over. Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 16. It says, moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and walking, slakia, and making a tinkling with their feet, meaning again, they're haughty, man, they're proud, because we know how black women get, when they get, when they get turned up, and they get to talking, man, they, moving their head a certain way, we know how they get real animated, right? And wanton eyes, meaning, those lustful eyes, man, because again, a lot of, so-called black women are, promiscuous, but that's not the topic, at the moment, the topic is, their hair. Why black women have a hard time growing their hair? Because again, the Lord cursed you, the majority of you, because you still have, certain black women, which I've seen, plenty that actually do have, long hair. If it's not long, they have, really big afros, man, beautiful texture of hair, right? But for the majority, this applies to you. It says making a tinkling with their feet because, you did, our women were decked out, in the ancient world, they were dressed nice, they had the jewelry on, just like how black women today, they love to dress nice and, put jewelry on and, smell good and all of that. Well, it's not the same way, that it used to be, right? So this is verse 17. It says, therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. And right, man, said the Lord will smite with a scab. This is why, again, a lot of women, they they have a hard time growing their hair, or they end up losing it once they get to a certain age. Why? Because again, they're wearing these weaves, these wigs. Because I've seen a video, which I'm pretty sure brothers have seen the same video, of how they make these synthetic, weaves, where you have, it was either a Moabite, a so-called Chinese man, or an Elamite, so-called East Indian man, taking bags of some type of substance, taking it, I forgot what exactly he did to it, whether he boiled it or did something to it, and then, he started stretching it out until it started looking like hair, right? That's the synthetic, weaves. And then you actually have, Moabite, so-called Chinese, and, Elamite, so-called, East Indian, women whose hair is touching the floor, and that was the Israelite women back in the ancient world, man. They had very long, very beautiful hair, but what, much like the entire nation of Israel, but in particular, the so-called black woman, you made the Lord angry. So therefore he cursed you, because the Lord knows you love your hair. This is why, you spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars just on your hair alone, because again, that's what, you love. This is why you have to wear, another person's hair on your scalp, which is not good, man. And we know that, those women, they cut their hair and sell it to you. They make these weaves, or wigs. And in reality, you're buying human hair, which that's what they call it, excuse me, just to put it on your head, not understanding that it's doing irreversible damage. That's how a lot of so-called black women end up going bald, because again, it's damaging your scalp. Not to mention all of the different, products, that they have out there that, cause women in general to lose their hair, but especially black women, all of the different products that you use, that's why, the men, we don't have a problem, growing our hair now. Where she said, guys have dreads, which, that's off, because I myself, I used to have dreadlocks, but what, man, after, learning that it's shameful for a man to have long hair, I combed them out. Now I have, braids, if I comb them out, or not comb them out, but, if I take them out, then what, I'll pick my hair and then I'll have an afro, but this just goes to show you that, again, women love their hair. In particular, black women love their hair, and the reason why they do this is because, they were cursed from the Lord. You made the Lord angry with your behavior, so therefore he cursed you, So let's get this in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 11. I'm going to start at verse 14 because I just mentioned it, right? It says, doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? So, right, it's reasonable for a man to have a hair length or hair at a certain length. Mine, it doesn't go past, my neck, because before, my hair was down to my chest, but now, it's at the end of my neck, and that's, long enough for me. But again, it's like she said, guys have dreadlocks, which is not that hard for a man to grow his hair out. Even if, a man doesn't necessarily have dreads or braids, let's just say he goes, about a month, without getting a haircut, he'll have an afro, But what? That's not easy for so-called black women to do. Those that Isaiah 3:17 applies to, that's not easy for them. Because again, a lot of women have alopecia as well. They go bald, prematurely. because it's understandable, you get older, you lose your hair, for men and women. But at a young age, you shouldn't be losing your hair. But when I say we, the men of the Lord, we understand why this is happening to you, but you don't understand, right? But that's why, most black women do this, why they have, low self-esteem when it comes to their hair, because again, they can't grow it, that long, luxurious hair like they used to have, because again, you're proud, which is why the Lord is, judging you in that way, because again, as a nation, we're cursed, because again, you don't see, women of the Northern Kingdom, the so-called Latino and Native American women, they have to do this. Now, do certain, Latin women wear weaves and wigs? Yeah, but it's not on the scale that, the Judite woman does, But 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 15, it says, "But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering." And right, a woman's hair is her glory, and we know that, black women love their hair. But again, to answer that woman's question, why did they do this, is because the Lord cursed them. Just plain and simple, because so-called black women are proud. Judah is the head tribe, so whatever, Judah does to other nations, not to other nations, but, even other nations, they copy, what we do. But what I was saying is whatever Judah does to other tribes, they follow after, but you don't really see, the Northern Kingdom women dealing with this, only the Southern Kingdom women, But that's why black women have a hard time growing their hair out. Most black women have a hard time growing their hair out is because the Lord cursed you, because you did something, to make him angry. You were proud, you were haughty, as it says, and named those things. So therefore, he took your hair from you, So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakodash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.